Chapter 4 Swiss Family Robinson, the first day on shore. While they were thus busy, I piled up a number of large stones at a little distance away from the tent, and on the margin of a little stream, to form a fireplace. Gathering several armfuls of dried twigs and branches of trees, I placed them on the stone hearth, and soon had a cheerful blaze. Upon this I placed our iron pot full of water, and into it my wife dropped several of the tablets of portable soup that she had brought from the ship. Meanwhile, Fritz, who had loaded his gun, proceeded along the banks of the stream to look for game. Ernest sauntered toward the sea, while Jack scrambled along among the rocks to search for shellfish. Having now a little leisure to look about me, I returned to our landing place to secure the two hogsheads or barrels that we had taken in tow. I discovered, however, that the spot on which we had landed was very inconvenient for unloading because the spot was too steep. While I stood considering what was the best to be done, I was alarmed by hearing Jack cry out, as if in terror. Seizing a hatchet, I ran to his aid, and I found him wading up to his knees in a shallow pool, where an enormous lobster had seized him by the leg with one of its claws, resisting all his attempts to get rid of the enemy. I jumped into the water, and striking a blow at the creature with the hatchet, soon brought it maimed to the shore, to Jack's great delight. He laid hold of it with both his hands and set off to carry the captive to his mother. Scarcely had he grasped it, however, when it struck him with a violent blow with the back of his tail, that he threw it on the ground, and he began to cry. I could not help laughing outright at the little fellow's misadventures, and in his anger he took up a stone, and he stunned the creature by a blow to the head. Finding the lobster helpless, Jack ran with its mother, exclaiming, "Mother, mother, Ernest, Frank, see, I've caught a lobster, such a large one. Where's Fritz?" Everyone congratulated him on his success and listened with astonishment at the recital of the perils he had encountered in securing this prize. Ernest suggested that the creature should be at once cooked for dinner, but his mother decided it should be set aside till we had more need of it. "I think," said Ernest, "I have had discovered something quite as good to eat as Jack's lobster, but I did not care to get any because I should have to wade in through the water." "What an excuse!" exclaimed Jack, afraid of getting wet. "And they were only nasty mussels. I dare say they weren't fit to eat." "I believe that they were oysters," replied Ernest quietly, "and are not at any great depth in water. And pray, why did you not bring us some? Every sort of wholesome food is now acceptable. And to fear getting wet, how absurd! You see that the sun has dried my clothes and Jack's already," said I. "I did not think about that, Papa," replied Ernest. "Or I could have brought salt as well. I saw a great quantity of the fissures of the rocks produced by the evaporation of the seawater, I suppose. Doubtless, my little philosopher, go and bring some unless you should like to eat the soup without salt." In a short time he returned with what was evidently common salt, but so mixed with sand that it seemed to be of no use. "I can improve it," said my wife, "by dissolving it in fresh water and straining it through a piece of linen. If the water is allowed to evaporate or dry up, the salt will remain behind." "Why should we not use seawater?" asked Ernest. "Because it's too bitter," replied Ernest. The soup was now ready, but Fritz had not returned. Where could he be? While we waited, my dear wife remarked, "How are we to eat the dinner now that we've prepared it? We have neither spoons, nor plates, nor cups. We cannot lift this huge pot for boiling soup to our mouths." We all laughed heartily, especially when Ernest said, "If we only had some coconuts, we could divide the shells in two. They would be splendid cups." "Certainly," I replied. "But why not wish for a dozen silver spoons? Wishing is useless. We must invent something." "The shells I saw would serve us for spoons capitally," said Ernest. "True, my boy. Oyster shells are better than nothing. Run, boys, and get us some as quickly as you can." Away started Jack. Ernest followed slowly, and when he reached the spot, there was Jack, up to his knees in the water. He hastily detached the oysters and threw them to Ernest, who collected them together, being still very careful not to wet his feet, and they quickly obtained a good supply. Almost at the same moment as they returned, Fritz also reappeared with one hand behind his back, affecting a dispirited air. Empty-handed? I asked, but his brother, who crowded around him, shouted at the suckling pig. It's a suckling pig. Suckling pig, did you kill it? Oh, do I see? Oh, let's see it. Fritz then, with a self-satisfied look, produced his prize, the first result of his hunting exploits. He told us that he had wandered into the other side of the stream and found the vegetation very different. Green grass, pleasant meadows, and such magnificent trees to shade us from the heat. And Papa, he added, there are chests and boxes and spars floating about, and the beach is strewed with portions of the wreck. Can we not go and get them? If the animals were here that we left on board, it'd be easy to find food for them, and how useful they would be, especially the cow, to supply us with milk. Don't let us stay in this barren place. Patience, I said, not so fast. One thing at a time. Tomorrow we will try what we can. But tell me, did you see any traces of other shipmates? No, Papa, not a sign of them, on sea or on the land. I think this is an island. There are pigs here, for I have shot one. It is not exactly like the pigs in Europe, for it has paws, and they're more like a hare. That's a rabbit. I saw several of them in the grass, sitting there with their hind legs and feeding themselves like squirrels. It's not a pig at all, said Ernest, who had been examining it. It has hair like silk, 4 large cutting teeth in front. I believe it's an animal I've read about. It's called an agouti. To me, it kind of looks like a rat without a tail, but there it is, or a squirrel without a tail. I believe you're right, I replied. Its appearance corresponds exactly with the descriptions I have read, as well with the pictures. While you were discussing this question, Jack was endeavoring to open an oyster with his knife. Here's a simpler way, I said, by placing some of the hot coals. They quickly opened up by themselves. See, my children, these are considered to be great delicacies. Let us taste them. No one, however, cared to eat the oysters, so they threw away all but the shells, which were used instead of spoons and plates and basins. While we were making a good meal, the dogs discovered Fritz's agouti and began tearing it into pieces before we observed them. Perceiving this, Fritz seized his gun, the first thing he could lay his hand on, and he struck at them with it so violently as to bend it. The poor beast ran off howling, and he had then threw stones after them as long as he thought they could reach them. My voice recalled him to himself, and when his rage calmed down, I talked seriously to him about giving way to such ungovernable passion. He looked much ashamed and owned that he was wrong, and presently, after begging his mother's pardon, I observed him trying to make friends with the dogs by offering them some biscuit. The sun was low on the horizon before we finished our meal. The fowls and the ducks gathered round us, and my wife gave them some corn from a bag I had seen her throw into the tub alongside the little Francis. I commended her forethought, but at the same time urged her to feed the birds on biscuit crumbs and to keep the corn for sowing, which is planting. The pigeons retired to certain holes in the rocks, and the fowls roosted on top of the tent, while the ducks and geese sought shelter in the marshy margin of the river. We too made preparations for the night. Loading our firearms, we placed them so that as to be at hand in case of alarm, and having offered up our evening prayer, withdrew to our tent to lay down to sleep. To the great surprise of the children, it was almost immediately dark, from which I guessed were somewhere near the equator, or at least within the tropics. I looked out at once more to make sure that it was all right, and then I closed the entrance of our tent. The day had been warm, but it is now intensely cold, and we were glad to creep close together for warmth. The children were soon asleep. My wife and I kept awake for some time, but sleep crept over us insensibly, and our first night on shore was passed quietly and without any alarm. Hope you liked it.